Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Audietis. This episode of Nos Audietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Audietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A sideline fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Ray Gibbs through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going good!
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Porter says, cheated!
You want to win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Audietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and our subscribers. We're recording on March 5th, 2024. I am your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today is my co-host, Aaron Campo, and our engineer, Lickett. Well, the Sounders opened their 2024 home campaign in eerily similar fashion to how they closed out their 2023 season. No, it wasn't a loss, but they did fail to score again. This time it was a 0-0 tie against Austin FC, a team that seemed absolutely intent on parking the bus and doing absolutely nothing else with it. The Sounders managed to squeeze off 23 shots and allowed 2 completely harmless attempts from well outside the penalty area and had 10 times as many touches inside the Austin FC penalty area. But they didn't make enough of those chances. To add insult to injury, Pedro de la Vega, who I thought looked pretty darn good in his 63 minutes, went out with a hamstring injury that we just found out will cost him 6 to 8 weeks as the Sounders try to figure out why he keeps getting hurt. We're just 2 games into the season, and the vibes could hardly be worse, Aaron. Is it actually that bad?
It's not good. I think I'm still pretty bullish on this team.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to be smooth sailing from here on out. Like, I think it's going to be kind of a slog for a little bit. The Austin game and the LA game both, to me, felt like a good team doing most things pretty well and struggling in the final third. And you know, that was kind of the story of a lot of last season as well. So I think it's reasonable that people are frustrated about it, but I think the team's going to be okay. Like, I don't think that this is going to be a repeat of the year before last. I think the team will make the playoffs. I think there's a good chance they're going to be one of the best teams in the West when all is said and done. But I do not think it's going to be smooth sailing. I think that it's going to be kind of a rocky start to the year. It's going to be, you know, probably a little bit of a hole to dig out of until, you know, God willing, everybody gets healthy. But I see a lot of things that are fundamentally good about the team that they're still doing at a high level. Defensively, I think they've looked great. They gave up 2 goals against LAFC, but, you know, I think that one of them was just kind of a worldie. So I'm not going to sweat too much about that. Austin created absolutely nothing. Granted, they probably weren't really attempting to create too much, but the Sounders,
they really didn't get. You got to give them. They got to give the Sounders some credit there, right? Like, Austin barely crossed the halfway line.
Yeah. The Sounders were in complete control of that. A buddy of mine texted me pretty much at the end of the game and said, has there ever been a team that controls so many games completely that they don't end up winning? And it really does feel that way sometimes. You know, they were in complete control of this game. It was definitely one of those games where it just felt the whole time like the goal was coming, and it never did. But Austin's a bad team. I mean, and I think that that's the thing, right? Is that this isn't a game that the Sounders should struggle to win. This should be an easy win, right? If they were playing a better team, I think that it would be a little easier to not forgive, but to get over a game like this.
Mm-hmm.
but because that's Austin at home should be a gimme 3 points. And so
And yet 2 years in a row.
yeah, it's, it's something else. I don't blame anybody for being frustrated. I think the vibes are bad, especially now that De La Vega is going to be hurt because, I mean, really, the Sounders did not look terrible against LAFC before he came on, but they were a much different team after he came on.
And I would say they weirdly looked better, I thought, after he came off against Austin.
Yeah.
And maybe that was just because they had a little bit more urgency to the attack. But he did a lot of things that I thought were really encouraging when he was on the field. I mean, he's definitely not afraid to dribble at opponents. He's effective, in the press. I like his game a lot. He attempts passes that really no one else will attempt. He's, I think given time, this could be like, I'm really encouraged by the signing in general.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, it's frustrating that he's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, he's going to miss, a solid third of the season, or a quarter of the season, I guess. I just want to go through some of these chances. And it's easy to say that the Sounders didn't look dangerous at time enough, but I think they had at least 6 very good chances in this game. There was Leo Chu cutting in on his right foot, shoots it just high over the crossbar. Morris had an open header. Jackson Reagan had a pretty much open header. Josh Atencio had a good header that got saved. Josh Atencio had another shot that just went barely wide. And then Rui Diaz had 2 great chances. One of them was saved, although it was called out for a goal kick, ridiculously enough. And then he had the other one where he hit the underside of the crossbar and it stayed out. That one, I thought for sure when he hit it, I thought that was a goal for sure. And I will say I was very encouraged in general by Rui Diaz's performance. He looked really sharp. I mean, that looked like, to me, vintage Rui Diaz in that game.
Yeah, I think that if there's one really positive thing to take away from both of these games, it's how good he's looked. And I think he last year, he hasn't scored, and I think that would be the counterpoint to that, but he just didn't look like this last year. He looked like a shell of his former self, and I think this year he has looked very much like his former self. And maybe that's because he hasn't been playing, he hasn't been starting as much, and he's able to exert himself more and give more than he was able to give when he was still starting every game. But whatever it is, I think it's been really encouraging. I think he's gonna find a goal pretty soon, which will be, I think, very nice for everyone, and himself included, because it has been a while. And it does, I mean, it really does kind of feel like the cliche of once they find a goal, they'll start coming. But it does feel that way, because it feels at times like they're pressing, but they are creating chances. And, it's frustrating right now because you can't have these points back. And,
No.
It's there's just not a lot to this early in a season, after a season that ended in such disappointing fashion last year. There's not a lot to harken back to that's positive. They had that great run towards the end of the season last year, but that was 6 months ago. And, so there's not a lot to cling to that's tangible. That's the actual on-field product right now. That's making anybody happy. I feel like the vibes will turn pretty quickly once they do, but it just might be a while before they do.
Yeah. And I think that, and it's not just the, we'll talk a lot about this a little bit later in the show, but it's not just the on-field stuff that feels off. There's some off-field stuff that also seems like it's not going too well. But before we get into that, I know one of the hot topics of discussion this week has been around the way the Sounders handled Pedro de la Vega. What do you make of that? He came out he got hurt in the 63rd minute, sort of the expectation he'd play 60, 65 minutes, something like that. Do you think he got left on too long? Do you think that he got rushed into starting?
Yeah, I mean, I hope not. I don't feel like I have enough information to offer a credible opinion, but what I will say is that I don't think the Sounders have ever could have been reasonably accused of being reckless rushing players back from injury. So I'm sure there was some pressure, especially after that first game, to try to get him onto the field. But I just feel like if there were signs that he wasn't ready to be starting, I have a hard time believing he would have started that game. I think the Sounders tend to be very cautious.
They're pretty cautious.
Yeah. And, it's a hamstring injury on a cold night for a player that is just coming back from injury, maybe doesn't have full fitness. But sometimes players just get injured.
I mean, he'd been back in full training for, close to a month at this point. So it's not like it wasn't like he came off the street and started. I mean, the Sounders, I thought, were pretty careful. And I mean, they didn't start him in any of the preseason games. They ramped him up. I thought they were being pretty prudent in the way that they bring him back. And I'm sure people are sitting here going, oh, if they're so careful, why is Reed Baker Whiting still hurt? And that's fair. But he got 5 weeks off between the end of the season and when he finally came back and played. And now, Reed Baker Whiting is a whole nother situation with his injury. But I think it sort of goes to show that it's like most of the time, these injuries are not totally predictable.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell. Like on some level, you have to trust players when they say they feel ready. I would imagine there's a fair number of there's monitoring that they can do, but that can only tell you so much. I don't know. On some level, I think this is kind of bad luck.
If it were a re-injury, I think that would be one thing. Like if he's hurting, if he, had been dealing with a hamstring issue and it injured the same hamstring, right? I think it's maybe a little more reasonable to say maybe they were too aggressive, but that's not the case. So,
well, it was the same hamstring he hurt when he was with Argentina, but then he had hurt his other hamstring when he first came back to they brought him back. He got like a month off.
Right.
They brought him back. He hurt another hamstring, had a slight, then they sort of like dialed him back a little bit. So I don't know. It's a tough one.
Right.
But I am not a physio. I sort of am, even more so than I trust the coaches to make tactical decisions. I really feel like I don't have anywhere to speak to on how well or poorly they're handling these injuries. Although it does start to look bad.
It does look bad.
Deny that.
It does look bad, but I think that professional athletes get hurt, and
yes,
and
every team is dealing with a lot of hamstrings. Every team feels like they are hamstrung by hamstrings.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe they did. Maybe they were too aggressive. Maybe you shouldn't have started. I think it's pretty crazy to think that you can make that judgment without, medical knowledge of his specific conditions. And I just think that there's a tendency a lot of the time when somebody gets hurt to want to find a way to blame it on somebody. And I think just the reality is that professional athletes get hurt sometimes. Soccer players hurt their hamstrings. It's just the thing that happens, and it's frustrating, especially because the Sounders are dealing with so many injuries right now, and they're injuries that are making a player like Pedro de la Vega a lot more important because of the players that are out hurt. But it's just the way she goes.
Yeah. Some good news on the injury front. It looks like João Paulo and Yeimar were full in training today. So the expectation is that they're going to at least be available for selection. And if they can both, if they're both fit enough to start, which I don't know if they are, but if they can both start, I actually like this potential lineup. Like if they were to go with like a 4-4-2 with Chu, Morris, Rui Diaz, and Roldan across the four, and then Atencio and João Paulo in sort of like those bucket positions. I actually like that formation. I actually think that could work.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, I think that my issues with the roster and the players that they have right now are probably not going to be fully solved by players getting healthy. But I think it's really clear they've missed João Paulo so far this year. I think it's been a pretty
and Rusnak
for sure. Yeah, as well. I mean, to miss one of those guys is difficult. To be missing both of them, I think is really quite a hill to climb.
Yeah,
I think that the odds of them getting shut out against Austin, if they have one of those guys, are a lot slimmer. If they have both of those guys, I think they're, even slimmer still. So I feel maybe it's not enough to fully overcome losing De La Vega, but I do think that it makes it sting a little bit less. And the defense has been great, but I think having Yamar back is always going to be a very welcome thing.
And it gets Jackson Reagan back onto his more comfortable side. There's some benefits there as well. He's such an important part of their passing game. I mean, at some point this will be, I don't know if the Sounders will ever be fully fit. Like, we need to come to terms with the idea that maybe their best 11 never gets on the field, but I'm still reasonably confident in the top 15, 16 players on this roster. But it bears repeating that they haven't, they've had to dig even deeper than that so far.
Yeah.
So, we'll see. I'm hesitant to pass too much judgment until we see something a little closer to what this team was envisioned to be, and hopefully, in a couple weeks we'll be getting pretty close to that. But in the meantime, this is a team that has not scored a goal from open play yet this year. One of just, I think, 4 teams that have not scored from open play this year, maybe 5 teams that haven't scored from open play this year. But it's the gap, like I said earlier, the gap between the teams that have scored the one good game changes that narrative a lot. And they're going to be playing a Philadelphia Union side who has 2 matches against Pachuca in the CONCACAF Champions Cup sandwiched around this one. They played tonight actually at home. They started all their regular starters. Most of them went 90 minutes. I would imagine there's going to be a heavily rotated lineup on the weekend. And this seems like a pretty good opportunity for the Sounders to, maybe not ball out, but to get 3. This is a game they should feel like they have the potential to get 3 points from.
Yeah, I don't think Philly has been super impressive this year. Playing away is always, it's always tougher, obviously, but I think it's a winnable game. I think that, especially the circumstances you mentioned, they're going to be not on, full rest. They just played Sporting KC, so I'm sure they got the hell beat out of them in that game. So, it's there for the taking. And I think even though this Philly is not the Philly of a year or 2 ago when they were, I think, one of the best teams in the league and making the MLS Cup final, there's still a team I think that you feel pretty good about beating, even if you're beating a sort of a diminished version of the team, especially beating them away. So I'm hopeful. I wouldn't say I'm optimistic necessarily, but I do think that the ingredients are there. They just need to execute a little better in the final third while, still maintaining in the defensive phase, because they have looked great defensively. I think that the kind of defensive numbers they put up last year are probably unsustainable, but I still think they're an elite defensive team. And that makes me willing to be a little more patient, because if they can keep that up, they're really not that far from being an elite team just generally.
Right. And so, yeah, this is a matchup that I think could work out in their favor. And if they can get a goal or 2, I don't see any reason why their defense can't pitch a shutout in Philadelphia or not. Weirdly enough, the Sounders have never won in Philadelphia. It's one of, I think, only 2 stadiums they've visited at least 3 times and never won in. They're 3-3, I think, in Philadelphia. Yeah. Last time they were there was 2019, and that was a 0-0 tie. That was, if I remember correctly, a very ugly game. I think their last 2 games there may have been 0-0 ties, actually.
I feel like they've played on an inordinate number of ugly games in Philadelphia. I think maybe the most boring Sounders game I've ever watched was, I think, in 2011, 2012, when they played the Diamond. It was like the first game they played the Diamond 4-4-2, and it was muddy and nasty. And that's always what I think of when they play Philly, is that game that was like 10 years ago at this point, 12 years ago at this point. I don't know why, but
and I will note they did win there in the 2014 Open Cup final.
They did,
but it was not a regular season game, which was And weirdly, one of the other places that the other place they visited a bunch and never won in is LAFC, which is again someplace they have technically won. They won a Western Conference final there, most famously. But so the number of stadiums they've literally never won in is getting pretty small. I think Atlanta and maybe Saputo. They may have never won in Saputo in Montreal, but this is not the point of what we're talking about here. So we're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about some of the other off-field vibey stuff that seems to be off. And this may be a continuing thing that we're going to follow, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to Nos Arietes. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some of this off-field stuff that feels a little off right now. We don't have a ton of answers. We are looking for some answers. So that's why I say we may revisit some of these subjects. But I was talking to someone with the Sounders today, and we mentioned this idea that the vibes feel kind of off. And they were saying how there does seem to be this little bit of a disconnect. On one hand, you can look at the way things are going around the Sounders, and it's really easy to feel like there's all this positive momentum. You know, they did this great job with launching the redesigned crest. They just opened Long Acres. They are part of this world. They've tied themselves to this World Cup bid. You know, they just put out their new jerseys, and everyone seems to love these new jerseys. And, you know, you add this all up and it feels like they're getting a lot of the big stuff right. You know, even the stuff that even if you don't love what's going on the field, they're getting a lot of the big picture. They just signed Pedro de la Vega. They made this really nice signing that everyone seems to like. And yet there does seem to be this disconnect where there's this negative vibe surrounding the team. Part of that, I think, is the results. But the other thing is that for all this positive stuff that's going on, I don't think fans feel very connected to a lot of it. You know, you look at the brand unveiling. There wasn't really a public way to access that other than virtually. You know, you look at Long Acres for totally understandable reasons. They've not been able to actually have fans out to Long Acres yet because Long Acres actually isn't done yet. It's like a lot of the public spaces are still being worked on. But in any case, that's not been very public. That's not really, fans can't touch that. They can't interact with it yet. You know, you look at the jersey. That was something that was done. Again, that was a virtual thing. Sure, you can go out and buy the jersey, but there wasn't an event tied to it where people could feel it. And then the other big element is, or then you look at the World Cup. And I think as we get closer and closer to the World Cup, it's becoming more and more apparent that while the World Cup will probably be a lot of fun, if purely from a Sounders fan perspective, I don't know that the Sounders are going to benefit directly from this at all. Like all the improvements that are being done at Lumen Field feel like they're way more focused on either being just for the World Cup. Like it's looking like the grass is only going to be something that's there for the World Cup. A lot of the improvements that we thought might happen at the stadium, I don't know that they're going to be things that Sounders fans can really interact with very much. And if they are, there are things that are going to be much more focused on the Seahawks. There's a good chance the Sounders might have to open and both before and after the World Cup, they might have to go on long road trips to accommodate everything. And even in Seattle, I don't know how many of these things you can really directly tie to the World Cup. You know, like most of the improvements around town were things that were already being planned, like the light rail extensions and the waterfront improvements and all this kind of stuff. And it'll be great that that hopefully it's all up and running for the World Cup, but it's not because of the World Cup that any of it's there. And I think that a lot of this is starting to dawn on Sounders fans that it's like, well, this isn't really like, how am I like we might even we're probably not going to get special access to tickets.
Yeah.
You know, and then the most recent thing that happened is, you know, the Sounders sent out season ticket packages, and in the past, they've been mostly coming in a nice packaged box, and there's some literature that goes along with it, and there's sort of like a welcome to the season, and it feels special. And there's been a sense that maybe it's a little wasteful, which I think is fair. Like, I don't need another box in my life. I don't need more literature in my life. These are things that are probably going to go in the trash, but they do send a message, I think, that you're valued, right? And this year, the season ticket package showed up in a nondescript white mailer. Your stuff was just haphazardly stuffed inside of it. No letter, no literature at all, no label that even says it's from the Sounders. And it just felt like it was an afterthought. And I think you add all this stuff up, and Sounders fans are feeling kind of like maybe a little, not necessarily taken advantage of, but taken for granted is a little bit better way of putting it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there is the relationship between the fans and the club has changed in the past, I don't know, 5-ish years, I think. And I think this is something we've kind of been talking about for years as the league has grown, where as the league gets more big time, more big businessy, more sophisticated, the teams become more sophisticated organizations, you necessarily lose some of the connection with the fans. And I think that that's certainly part of it. And it's like you said, there are big things happening at the club. And I do think that it's not just the Sounders. I think it's everywhere in the professional world where it's like, hey, this is a big deal to me. Right. Mm-hmm. It's like everybody's been in a situation where they hear the big boss at their company giving a keynote speech or something about something that they do not care about, that doesn't impact them positively in any way. And they're expected to be enthusiastic about it. And it's just not. Why? Why would I be enthusiastic about this thing?
Yeah, the boss got a new office. Who cares?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. And that is kind of like, for me, like the excitement about the World Cup is sort of like, I'm probably not going to benefit from that. There's a good chance I'm not going to be able to go to the games, like a lot of people I think are going to be priced out. I think for 99% of people that live in Seattle, the World Cup is mostly going to be a pain in the ass. I'm not saying that's not a reason for the 1% of us who are excited about it. Lots of things happen in big cities all the time that inconvenience most people. That's life in the big city, right? I'm not saying that, but it's, I think that there is sort of a tone deafness sometimes from the club with things like this. And I think too, that there are a lot of things that have happened over the past few years that create an animosity that never really got resolved. The Providence thing is a great example of that, where I think the Sounders just kind of are acting like that all completely went away. And there's still a lot of anger about it. It's not as much of a factor as it was at the time of the announcement, but I think a lot of people are still feel alienated about it. I think that there's tension between the club and the supporters always, but I feel like it's been ramped up a little bit lately. Since the CCL win, there hasn't been that much to get excited about on the pitch either.
Right.
And I think that sometimes it's easy for people who are on the business side of sports teams to forget that ultimately they're a sports team. And the primary thing that drives how the fans feel about the club or the team or whatever is, how is this team doing on the field? And the Sounders they made the playoffs last year. They have exciting players. I think they're going to be a good team, but they haven't really been that much to write home about for a while. Even the year they won the CCL, not to take anything away from that accomplishment, the rest of the year sucked, as I'm sure we all remember. So I think if the Sounders can get back to winning trophies, a lot of this fixes itself. But I do feel like there was a time where when things weren't going great on the pitch, there was an effort by the club to kind of go the extra mile in ways that they just don't really seem to do anymore.
Well, and I think that part of that is understandable because they've been pretty busy.
Yes, absolutely.
Other stuff. But I think they need to realize that even if they didn't lose sight of the ball, that they still need to give some attention to these issues. Like, they can't just write these things off and say like, well, in June we're going to have all these activations at Long Acres, and so just hang out, just bear with us for a few more months. And like, that's just not how that's not how fans work. And on some level, if they can start winning games and playing fun soccer, to some degree, this is going to go away. But I do think it's a good reminder that the front office can't really control the results. Like the business office can't really control the result at all. And they need to be buttoned, like the whole organization needs to run well. And they brought in Hugh Weber, who's by all accounts extremely qualified, extremely competent manager. But I wonder if he's maybe too focused on some of the big picture items and not always focused on some of the details like these that are maybe getting lost. And hopefully we're going to get some answers and to figure out what exactly happened with this. There's this whole situation going on with an ECS supporter that you alluded to that got banned, and there doesn't seem to be due process going on in terms of him getting an appeal and sort of understanding this whole thing. I don't have answers there. I don't know exactly what all is good. It might be a huge deal. It might be nothing, but there was a protest before, the March of the Match, and the March of the Match essentially was a protest. And this is all stuff that sort of contributes to a feeling of unease and lack of positive vibes around the team. And these are things that probably need to be addressed. And I don't know. I think it probably speaks well of the Sounders that they're now aware of these things and they seem to care. What they do about it, though, matters. And it's going to be interesting to see how they react to, how they explain this season ticket package thing, which maybe is not a big deal. But I think a lot of fans, I've heard this refrain a lot over the years, and I feel like I'm hearing it more recently, is my tickets keep getting more expensive and the experience gets worse. And I think, like right now, I think it's hard to deny that going to games at Lumen Field feel like the Sounders are a tenant more so now than maybe ever before.
Yeah, and I think that experience of X keeps getting more expensive, and my experience is worse is consistent across all of society.
Yes.
But it would be nice if these things that are pure luxuries, like professional sports, that people are spending a lot of money on in not awful economic times, but certainly not great economic times. It would be nice if those experiences could at least keep parity, with how they used to be. And yeah, I mean, I went to the game last week, and the Austin game, and it was a blast. And I'm excited to start going to more games again. But it definitely was not. I hadn't thought about it this way, but you're totally right. It really felt more like the Sounders were tenants than it has in the past. And I don't know specifically what that is, but
yeah,
it was palpable, and yeah, it's, again, I think team starts winning, the vibes get better, and this stuff doesn't go away, but it becomes less of a factor. But I do think that the club has to be careful, with this kind of stuff, because we're in a very competitive entertainment market. And, if the results are consistently mediocre, like, I think we're both optimistic that the team turns it around, but I think we'd also both admit that there's a chance that they don't, and that this is just kind of the season doesn't turn out well. And then that's 3 years in a row that are pretty underwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say that I would be shocked if they missed the playoffs, but that's not the bar. The bar isn't make the playoffs. The bar isn't play good defense and get into the playoffs. The bar should be one of the elite teams in MLS. And that's what it felt to me when I saw this roster put together. I honestly felt like it was capable of being an elite MLS team. I still think that's possible. But that also, I think, in some ways heightens the importance of focusing on these other issues while we have their attention, while it's harder to say, no, go look at how good the results are. Right. Like, this is the time to get answers, to force the team to sort of explain and to, put it out there that there are going to be lean years, and for the club's own good, they need to be paying it. They don't want to let things get too too degraded,
Right.
where they're
Yeah.
really digging out of a deficit. So, I'm hopeful we'll get some satisfactory explanations. And, I don't want to turn this into a show where we're talking about this stuff every week, but this felt like a good time to bring up some of it. And my understanding is some of these things are actually going to be addressed at an upcoming, if not today, or I think this week actually at an Alliance Council meeting. So maybe we'll find out some more stuff about that. But anyway, this is probably a good place to call it. Aaron, thank you again for joining me. Thanks to our subscribers for supporting this entire venture. I just wanted to share we are on a trajectory to hit something like 2,500 paid subscribers in the next month or two, which is kind of mind-blowing that we're at this point already. So it's been really satisfying to see this grow. I'm excited to find new ways to invest in this property and to make sure that Sounder at Heart is not going through some of the same issues as the Sounders in that way. That we want to make sure that we're creating a sustainable thing here that people want to be part of. And so far so good. So thank you to everyone for doing that. Thank you to our sponsor, Full Pool Wines. I am Jeremiah Shan, signing off for Aaron Campo and Lickett. This is No Side Yet This, and remember, you will never get alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.